Hello, Frizzle folks. Let's talk about the books I've read recently. I'm going to rank them starting with the lower books, the disappointments, and working our way up to the books that I loved. And there are quite a lot of awesome books that I loved in this round. Way more than normal. You'll see. Rank 10 is Druid Vices and a Vodka. This is book 6 in a series where I read books 1 through 5 and I gave up. I DNF'd the series. But then I decided to revisit the series. You can see it didn't turn out the best. I decided to revisit the series because I was reading other books by this author that take place in the same universe and really loving them. I wanted to give this series a second chance, and it didn't work. And I think why it didn't work for me is intertwined with the structure of this series. We are following a regular bartender named Tori who accidentally in book 1 stumbles into the Society of Magical Bounty Hunters, and she kind of joins up with them and learns about the magical world, gets into trouble. There's like 4 different love interests across the course of these books, and I really liked the first few books as she was really adjusting to this magical world, and then the series quickly went downhill for me because what it becomes is it's her dealing with other people's problems. One of her friends, maybe one of her exes, one of her guys, she has like 5 of them, gets into trouble, and then she is responding to it. And that was very much the feeling of this book, is she was just dealing with everyone else's problems. And it never felt like there was internal conflict for her. It never felt like it was actually important to her. It was just like she was going on a side quest for several books in a row. So, I DNF'd Druid Vices and a Vodka. I'm giving it 2 stars, and its book tone is Byzantium Purple. Book tone is a reader personality type system. You are most likely to like the books that match your type if you want to take the test or if you want to learn more about how it works. I'll link all that in the footnotes for you. Next up, rank 9 goes to the Cry Wolf comics adaptation. So I got very sick this month and I had no more brain power left. There was no room in my brain for novels, so I turned to some comics. And I thought it'd be fun to finally get around to reading the graphic novel adaptation of one of my favorite series, the Alpha and Omega series. So I read these, and I guess they were readable, but it's like they took no care and thought into how they should adapt it, what they should include, what they should exclude. It felt very muddled, where the books have a lot of different plot lines and characters, and it was trying to include all of them, and so only briefly touched on most of them. So they all felt very bleh, meg. But they lost the internality of the books, where you get to hear the narrator's thoughts and feelings, and so everything felt flat and it didn't connect with anyone, and meh. I think one of its other greatest crimes is the art style was pretty lame. It was not only hard to tell people apart, our hot love interests were no longer hot. No. That's not how you should draw Charles. No. I gave the Cry Wolf comics 3 stars because, they were readable. I didn't hate them. I just really didn't love them. Rank 8 is Lyorn, book 17 in the Vlad Tolstoy series where I've been bouncing around a little bit. This is the newest release, and it was boring, lackluster, disorganized. In this novel, our protagonist Vlad is on the run from the mob, and he decides to hide out in a theater. The theater crew is rehearsing this play. The problem is that the play is controversial and is this close to getting shut down by the government censors. And if the play gets shut down, then our protagonist will no longer have this hideout from the mob. So he's invested in keeping the play on. And it's just kind of him pulling little strings with his connections to keep the show running. And that's about it. This book also has a lot of interludes where we get not only the script of this musical, lots of its songs, we also get an excerpt from a history textbook talking about the history of this controversial musical in world and what it's based on and stuff. And I felt like all of those history textbooks, play, script excerpts didn't help this book. It just made it feel like this book had even less plot than it already has. It's already scraping the bottom of the barrel, and then it just goes further into, okay, now here's a literal boring history textbook. What little in this book engaged me was that it really felt like this is setting up for a big conclusion to the series coming soon. There was quite a few moments in this book where our protagonist was really saying, I am going to be a protagonist in the next book and really do things. And I kind of wish that there had been things done in this book and not just telling us that there will be things done in the future, So I liked some passages of this book. It was readable, but I didn't love it. I'm going to give Lyorn 3 stars, and its book tone is Celadon Green. Rank 7 is Circe. Yeah, I read one of those very TikTok books. Doesn't happen that often, but it does happen occasionally, and I liked most of this book and loved some parts of it. This book is a retelling of Greek mythology. I think the part that I loved most about it was growing up with Circe. You get to see how she's grown up in this gods and titans society, but she doesn't love it. She has compassion for the humans, which all of the gods scorn. She becomes an outcast from this Olympian society and is banished to an island, gets to live by herself in the woods, and cultivate who she's going to be. And I loved that through line and theme of this book of Circe cultivating herself, of figuring out who she wants to be and who she can be, independent of her abusive childhood, independent of her messy relatives or what people expect her to be. So I loved the beginning of this book. I was really hooked and intrigued to see what she would build herself to, and I loved the ending of this book when you finally get to figure out where she's built herself to and see her ending. But the middle, I do think, dragged somewhat. And I'm giving Circe a generous 4 stars, and its book tone is Celadon Green. Can you believe it? Rank 7. And we're already to the 4 stars. Just a few videos ago, we had to wait until rank 1 before there was a 4 star. And definitely a part of why there were so many successes and hits this month is because I did a video project where I read books that my nemesis hates, and it went so well. So I'll link that video in the footnotes along with all the other more thorough review videos for books I'm talking about now. Rank 6 is Illuminae. Illuminae is a very interestingly constructed sci-fi novel because it's like the novel equivalent of found footage, where we are looking at police interviews, where we are looking at transcripts of video camera footage, reports made by an AI, and our protagonist's journal entries. And all of those get mashed together into telling a story, where we don't have a direct narrator, but we do have a lot of people's words we keep coming back to. So Illuminae is about a group of refugees. They are on a spaceship that's cruising along through space, and it is being chased by an evil corporate ship also going through space. And this chase sequence lasts like many months because both of their hyperdrives are broken or whatever. And we are following that refugee ship as they deal with what made them get on the ship in the first place, and as they deal with a lot of technical malfunctions that turn this very slow motion chase sequence into a very intense survival situation. The main people we're following and getting the perspectives of is 𝐂𝐑, a teenage hacker that's trying to get to the bottom of what is going wrong in this ship and how to fix it. Ezra, her ex-boyfriend, also one of the refugees who has been recently enlisted to become one of the fighter pilots. And the AI on the spaceship named Aiden, who was also encountering some problems. This book took me some time to warm up to it. At the beginning, I was feeling kind of lukewarm about it, I think mostly because the perspective was so distanced from the characters, I couldn't really connect with them, but once we started getting like 𝐂𝐑's journal entries and really focusing in on getting our found footage from like a few distinct sources repeatedly, I really started to click a lot more with this book. Despite the story being told in this very after-the-fact manner, it does such a good job of feeling so immediate in your face and really high stakes. It really uses all of these interesting documents to set a grim, haunting tone throughout the second half of this novel that I really dug. In the beginning of the book, 𝐂𝐑 and Ezra are recently ex-boyfriend-girlfriend, and then throughout the book they kind of rebond with each other, and I didn't think that was particularly well done. Like, we get to see, like, their text messages back and forth, but I never really felt their chemistry or engagement. It was just relying on me believing that they had been a good couple once. I also feel like, without spoiling anything, I kind of hate the ending of this book. I feel like the middle of this book was so haunting and gruesome and made some really interesting, intense decisions. And the ending of this book kind of backs off on that, and I feel like to the detriment of the story's quality. But I also read the audiobook, and it was very well put together, well produced. It's like full cast, sound effects, all of it, and it was a lot of fun. I think in total I'm giving Illuminae 4 stars because I did love it, and I am excited to jump into its sequels, and its book tone is New York Pink. Now, this was also my book club's pick for the month. I run a book club for my patrons via Discord, and you can sign up either with YouTube memberships or with Ko-fi memberships. The book we are reading next is this, stories of your life. I'm very excited. We're reading a short story collection. We've never done that before, but I think it's going to turn out very fun to be able to discuss each story individually. Rank 5 is the Taming Demons for Beginners series. I read all 4 books, and I loved all of them. This is in the same interconnected universe as the very first book I talked about in this video. As you can see, these rank much higher. So this book follows Robin, a girl who's very shy, book smart, and she's from a family of sorcerers, but she's been kind of raised on the edge of that life where her parents didn't want any part of magic. The series starts out, her parents have recently died mysteriously, and she's now staying with her uncle who summons demons for a living. And right now, he's got a demon chained up in his basement who is like kind of hot. So then over the course of book 1, Robin gets to know this demon, and in a moment of life or death desperation, she makes a deal with this demon. And I feel like book 1 is definitely the strongest book in the series because so much of it is her and this demon getting to know each other, where there's so much emotional tension between them, where she's so scared of him, physically, his power, and he is also pretty intimidated by her because, like, she's got the magic in this relationship, and he's been summoned out of his familiar demon world into this weird world of humans. And all of those scenes where they're slowly getting to know each other, both before and after they made the deal, just like tugged at my heartstrings. I loved watching them. I loved shipping them because, yes, this is definitely also a slow burn romance series. Book 1. Perfection. This is the good stuff. Like, I loved it. The future books in the series, a lot of that getting to know each other, the angst, the yearning is a little diminished, which is why book 1 is my favorite, but the rest of the books are still fun and worth reading, I'd say. I would just give book 1 like 5 stars and the subsequent books like 4 stars. So yeah, this series totally shines, and if you want a very slow burn urban fantasy of girl and demon, highly recommend it. I think where this book doesn't shine so much is where it has a lot of tie-ins, crossovers with the other series in this universe, which does muddy the plot somewhat. I rated these books on average 4.3 stars, and their book tone is Byzantium purple. Rank 4 is The Goblin Emperor. This is another one of those books that I picked out because my nemesis hated it, and yeah, I love this one. This book follows a lonely teenager named Maya. He is the son of the emperor, but he has been kind of in banishment his whole life because he is half goblin, and that just doesn't fly in this elf kingdom. But all of a sudden, his father and the other princes die, and he is next in line for the throne. So he all of a sudden becomes the emperor of the elf kingdom. And this becomes a problem for him because he does not know anything about politics from being in banishment his whole life, and also these elves in the political court don't really like him. He's an outsider, he's racially different. And this book is so intensely character focused. There's like the teeniest smidge of court intrigue, but like, don't read this book for that. This book is about his internal journey of going from this scared teenager who has no idea what he's doing and is really uncomfortable with the idea of being emperor into finding his peace and his confidence and his place as the emperor. So much of this book touched me because it's about him just trying to find friends and connections and people he can rely on, where he's trying to balance the decorum that is demanded of him as the emperor and also just like wants to break down and cry, where he like really wants to go and ask good questions, but he doesn't want to reveal how ignorant he is because then people won't respect him. And it's a lot of that little internal conflict and really dragging out everything. This book also goes out of its way to kind of throw a bunch of people and names at you where there are so many court politicians and they all have different agendas, and this book really doesn't hold your hand at helping you remember who everyone is. It's pretty discombobulating that way. And it feels like such a masterful and purposeful choice to me that this book is confusing because then I felt just as overwhelmed as our main character feels in all of this. And that was another moment of connection between me and him. So this book got me to cry, not once, but twice. I felt for this character so thoroughly. I loved him. I love following him. I love how slow and careful this book is with building the grief and depths of despair our character is in. And then at the end, when you get to see the resolution of all that, it's so satisfying. I gave The Goblin Emperor 5 stars, and its book tone is uranium blue. Rank 3 is Finder. This is one of my favorite books and was a reread for me. This book takes place in a town that's right on the border between the elf fairy land and the normal human world, and so it becomes a melting pot of those two cultures. We are following a human man, but he's not so normal. He has a magic power, which is how he found himself in Border Town. He can locate lost objects. And at the beginning of this book, he is approached by a police detective to try to help her catch some killers and some drug dealers. And at the beginning of the book, he's pretty reluctant about this. He doesn't want to get involved in all that, but he slowly gets hooked, and the book develops this really interesting mystery as you're trying to get to the bottom of this drug ring, while also tackling our protagonist's relationship with his own magical abilities and with the town's culture as a whole. I think one of the places where this book really shines is the side characters, is all these little fun friendships and relationships, where I believe the relationship between our protagonist and his best friend, who is an elf who is a motorcycle mechanic. Like, every moment they have together feels so tender and real and fun. Every moment between the protagonist and this cop who he's working with on this investigation feels so interesting, where they're getting to know each other, where they have some friction, where they have some admiration, where they have sometimes a little bit of flirting. The urban fantasy world and setting and friend group that is developed in this book is like masterful, and I would love to read a spin-off of any single character because they're all so real and feel like they're just jumping off the page. I also love what this book does with its plot, where it has a lot of these little mysteries that really feel like almost like classic fair play murder mysteries, where it's giving you all of these clues along the way. But also, like, midway through, the book plot also takes a turn. In parallel with the mysteries, we get another plot, which I will not spoil for you, but is definitely the kind of plot that is melancholic and slow-paced and really stretches your nerves and plays with your heartstrings. I love Finder. I feel like this book really encapsulates a lot of my love for the genre of urban fantasy, where we really get to explore the mix of humans and magic and what that mix does to both of them. I gave Finder 5 stars, and its book tone is anchor gray. Rank 2 is 2 books in a trilogy, the DFZ Changeling books I read, With a Golden Sword and To the Bloody End. Aren't these covers beautiful? I love them. This is another series that encapsulates a lot of what I love about urban fantasy. These books are so much fun. Like, I'm obsessed with them. As you can tell, they're up here in the 5-star range. This trilogy is following a woman named Lola. She's had an interesting life, because despite living in the human world, she doesn't necessarily belong there. She is a fairy changeling. And she's lived her life in magical servitude to this evil magician. At the beginning of the series, that evil magician goes missing, and suddenly she has her freedom. But also suddenly she has a bunch more problems because she needed him to survive, and also all of his enemies come calling. And then in book 2, everything spirals out in fun, really engaging ways. I love it. There's a few things that I want to particularly praise about this series, because it's just like chef's kiss amazing. The first one is the characters. Our protagonist Lola is so engaging. She's like made of internal conflict, where she's always right on the edge of like really fierce and cutthroat and like really just wanting to be nice and just like a little cinnamon roll inside. It's like every move she makes, she's fighting within herself of what decision to make, because who she needs to be and who she wants to be is like constantly at war with each other. And the side characters are beautiful. She has in this series 2 love interests, and they are both bad boys with a heart of gold, and like I love it. I love it. I do ship her more with one than the other, but like they're both fantastic. And throughout the series, we also get both of their perspectives as they all start working with each other on some life and death projects. I think one of the other things that I love about this series is that the power of our characters is tied directly to their character development. I just think this is such a cool concept, and whenever a book series pulls it off well, I love it. Like, one of the other series that I'm thinking of is the Stormlight Archive, where as you get better character development, you level up in the magic. And it's the same thing in this series, though done in a completely different way, where a lot of the magic is tied to belief. Both you believing in yourself and other people believing in you. So there's a handful of ways to level up your magic, but one of them is like gaining self-confidence, and another one is manipulating other people to believe you can do it. And this series plays so much with both of those ideas of what the power of belief is, both in positive and negative ways, and it really stretches our characters in interesting directions because of that, and I love the way that this works. I think another thing that this series does like so well is it just seems to like get better and better. Like, I loved and was obsessed with book 1, but by the time we get to the finale in book 3, like, my jaw is on the floor. I love these books. Highly recommend, especially because these are some self-published gems, and if you love these ones, you can also branch out to the other series in this interconnected universe. I gave all of these books 5 stars, and their book tone is Gainsborough Grey. Then, rank 1. The best book that I've read recently was The Book That Wouldn't Burn. Now, gonna be quite upfront honest with you. I made this ranking list a few days ago, and since I made the list, I have finished the sequel to this book, and I feel I do not like the sequel. So that's definitely coloring some of my memory of book 1, but we're just here to talk about book 1, and the sequel will be in the next recent reads video, okay? Okay. But like, if I can't summon up the rank 1 enthusiasm that this book deserves by itself, well, you can just go read the DFZ Changeling series that I was just talking about instead. So this is a book that's a little bit genre bending. I think I'd most put it for fans of high fantasy, but it also has a little bit of sci-fi twists to it, especially as you get farther into the book and into the sequel. But the first of our protagonists is this little girl named Lyorn. She lives in a poor town out in the desert, and at the beginning of the book, she and a lot of the people in her village get kidnapped as slaves. They're brought along for a while, they're rescued by one group who captures them as other slaves, and she ends up in the big city. She's very much out of place, out of her depth, but what Lyorn is really good at is advocating for herself. She's incredibly smart. Despite having no education, she's really good at mental math, she's really good at being persistent. And through this persistent advocating for herself and how smart she is, she gets a job. Instead of like cleaning the city sewers, she gets to go to be an apprentice librarian. Now, the library in this book is magic. It is potentially infinite in size. The characters aren't quite sure. A lot of becoming a librarian here is learning the shelving system of the library, which is very complicated, self-contradictory, and mysterious. So throughout this book, we are following Lyorn as she grows up, as she finds who she is, as she deals with a lot of prejudice, as people are like, oh, you're that person out from the desert? Pfft. So there's a lot of pressure on her, where there's a lot of people who want her to be kicked out and not become a librarian, and she has to continuously prove herself. Our other protagonist is a young man named Ivar, and him and a few of his siblings have been trapped in a single room of this library for forever, where their parents were born and raised in this one room of the library, where they were born and raised in this one room of the library, and they are the last of this civilization that has just been existing in one room of this infinite library. And he is determined to escape the room. And he starts finding these little weird clues and interesting things and starts exploring a little bit outside of this bubble that he's grown up with. And of course, eventually their two plots intersect in very interesting ways. I loved this book. I loved how it really took its time with its world building, where it takes a while for you to really get what is going on. And as soon as I felt like I really knew what was going on, just a few chapters later, there was a magnificent plot twist that was pulled off so well, pulled the rug right out from under me, and made me love the characters and the plot even more. This book also has a whole lot to say on kind of the power of knowledge as well, where all of our characters have this infinite library at their fingertips, and the ways that that knowledge both helps the society and hurts it, where it both helps people overcome their prejudice in some ways and reinforces the prejudice in other ways, depending on how you use and access the knowledge at your fingertips. You can definitely tell that the author has a lot of interesting things to say and creative ways to say them. I gave The Book That Wouldn't Burn 5 stars, and its book tone is Celadon Green. Now you might be wondering, where is the TBR jar book? I recently started this TBR jar game where patrons of mine submit a book name and I pull it out and I have to read it. I'm currently in the middle of my first pick, which is The Winter Sea. So it will definitely be in the next recent reads video, and in that video I will be picking out the next draw. So if you want to join in and submit a book, go ahead and submit it now and maybe I'll draw yours next. You might be interested in watching next another one of my recent reads videos.